remaining in his time. The honourable member for Kenora.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's great to resume my remarks. As I was saying before question period, Mr. Speaker, I was talking a bit about some of the ways that the government has been spending a lot more money and getting worse results for Canadians. I used the instance of food insecurity in the North and the government's approach with Nutrition North as a good example about that. And Mr. Speaker, I'll go into more detail about some of the concerns I have with this budget. But you know what? I'm in a good mood today, and I actually want to mention something in this budget that I'm cautiously optimistic about. Something that I was happy to see in the budget, and that is a sector-specific support for tourism. I believe it's $500 million under the Tourism Relief Fund, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy to see this. I know many colleagues on my side of the House are happy to see this funding. We've been calling for this funding for quite some time because we know that tourist outfitters and industries have been hit very hard as a result of the pandemic. We know that all too well in northwestern Ontario. Many camps haven't been able to open and have been losing revenue for the past year. Mr. Speaker, a number of outfitters have told me that if they lose this summer, or if they lose most of this summer, they likely won't be able to operate. They'll have to close their doors for good. So I say I'm cautiously optimistic about this funding because we know that the government has brought forward a number of measures that were supposed to support small businesses last year, and with rigid criteria for accessing the programs, many operations, particularly the seasonal operations, weren't able to access that, and many of those who were able to access the supports found that it was not strong enough, it was not enough to cover what they needed for the year. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll be watching to see where those funds end up, and of course I'm as I say, optimistic but cautiously optimistic and hopeful that those funds will get where they need to get to, Mr. Speaker. But again, as I alluded to, the government has been spending a lot of money. This is a big spending budget, and they like to pat themselves on the back for that. But I'm concerned about this budget for a couple of reasons, and one of them is that there is a clear lack of direction in this budget. Mr. Speaker, the stimulus programs we need to get our economy going again should be focused and time limited, and they should be focused on creating jobs in all sectors and in all regions of this country, and that includes supporting natural resources, supporting forestry and mining that creates so many good, well-paying union jobs across Northern Ontario, and is a major driver of our economy as well. And of course, as I mentioned before question period, Mr. Speaker, my most major concern, my most pressing concern with this budget is that there is no plan to get back to balance, and I'm concerned with that for a number of reasons. Mr. Speaker, before I go into that, I'll maybe get ahead of some of the members across the way here, and I'll note that Conservatives have supported many of the stimulus programs, many of the necessary programs every step of the way. We believe in supporting Canadians and getting them through this crisis. There's no question about it. Regardless of what members on the other side will say, the voting records show that we have stood with Canadians, and in many ways we were able to pass many things unanimously. We were able to bring forward a number of suggestions to fix some of these programs and make them better for Canadians, and in some cases the government took our advice, and that was great. However, we know that we cannot continue to spend into oblivion, as the Liberals have set us up to do. We believe that this stimulus must be targeted, but it must be phased out responsibly so that we can preserve public services for future generations. These are critical public services that future generations are going to be relying on. And Mr. Speaker, we know that with every dollar that we spend on servicing our debt, it's a dollar that's being diverted away from Canadians. It is a dollar that is not going towards these critical services. And of course, young people are going to bear the burden of that if the Liberals continue on this plan, their high spending plan. We know we will receive either major cuts to services or higher taxes or some terrible combination of both of them. And that's why Canada's Conservatives have been advocating instead for a responsible, measured approach to phase out many of these targeted stimulus programs to get us back to balance, to get our economy going again, and ensure that we are protecting those critical services, Mr. Speaker. And I want to make one more point about this, Mr. Speaker, because we often we often hear from the Liberals and other parties that the Conservatives are sort of only focused about dollars and cents, that we just want to balance the budget to say, check, we can balance the budget for fiscal reasons. However, that is certainly not the case, Mr. Speaker. A balanced budget is not an end in itself, but it is a means for us to be able to preserve these these public services for future generations. It is a means for us to be able to leave the next generation and those afterwards with a better life than we had. And Mr. Speaker, I believe that is a goal that we all share, and that is why we cannot continue down this path and burden young people with this debt. Young people they're concerned about going to school. They're concerned about getting a job after school. They're concerned about being able to afford a home. They're concerned about climate change. They're concerned about so many things and the Liberal government has just given them another thing to be concerned about. They need to be worried about what sort of public services they will have in the future. And again, Mr. Speaker, if we continue down this path, it will not look great for them. So, Mr. Speaker, overall, that is why primarily I cannot support the implementation of this budget and why I will be voting against this piece of legislation. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm looking forward to taking any questions and comments from my colleagues.
Questions and comments? Question and comment tile. Let's go first to the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks my honourable colleague from Kenora. Like him, I have tremendous concerns for the tourism sector. Unlike him, I don't think that the $500 million announced comes close to what's needed for the sector. There's a further $1 billion announced for Destination Canada to advertise Canadian tourism, which normally I would cheer. I've had very substantial tourism operations in my own riding express a sad concern that the promotion from Destination Canada, the $1 billion, will be for places that no longer exist. And I asked my honourable colleague, how can we move to do more to assist the tourism sector as we move forward through a very tough year for them?
Honourable member for Kenora.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the member from Saanich Gulf Islands for her comments and her question. And I agree with her, and that's why I noted that I was sort of cautiously optimistic about the funding that has been allocated in this budget. I'm happy to see it, but we know that tourist operators are really hurting, and they need a lot of support. And Mr. Speaker, to the member's question, what I've been hearing across my riding is that there's only so far that these programs are going to get. There's only so much that these programs will be able to do to keep these businesses afloat. At the end of the day, what they need is a plan for a safe and gradual reopening so that they can get back operational and having the sort of the amount of capacity that's able to have them make the profits that they need. And that's especially true in Northwestern Ontario, as many clients, many tourists come from the United States primarily, so it's very important.